Mm. Hello, everybody. I see people are trickling in. We're going to give it a couple minutes as people come and join the webinar, but the chat should be working, so feel free to say hello. Yeah, you can see us. Can you see the whole crew here? And you can see my Meet Quill screen. Amazing. This is what I like to hear. As we're warming up, waiting for more people to join, please in the chat, let us know where you're joining from, where in the world. I myself am in New York City. I see Venezuela, Miami, UK. Very international crew. I love that. Nixon 5. You know what's up. I don't think we have anybody from Texas here, so we should be safe for now. If I heard myself say that a week ago, I would be shocked. I wouldn't know what any of those words meant, but I'm a quick learner. If this is your first webinar here at AirOps, please drop a star emoji. Let us know it's your first time joining us. And if you've been here before, let me see a heart emoji. Who's coming back? See some stars. Welcome. Nice. Lots of new faces. Lots of new faces. Welcome, everybody. Wonderful. I'm getting a request to open up some chat settings. Give me just a moment. All right. Cool. Okay. I think it's about time to get started. A couple of housekeeping items before I introduce all of these lovely people hanging out here with me. We will have a Q&A session at the end. There should be the ability to add to a Q&A here, separate from the chat. That's the best way to organize all of your questions so that we can make sure we answer the most pressing ones at the end. We probably won't be able to monitor the chat and stop mid session. So please add them to the Q&A so we can catch up at the end. And yeah, other than that, this is a practitioner-led session. So we're going to have plenty of knowledge from the fine folks that you see on your screen. The way that it's going to work is I'm going to share a little bit of context. This is a rather product-heavy demo. We're going to really get under the hood of Quill and show what people from Chime, Udemy, Bitly have built. I'm just going to give a little bit of context so that, again, I see a lot of stars in the chat. If this is your first time hearing of some of these things, you have what you need to know to be able to follow along. I'm going to go pretty quickly through all of that so we can spend most of the time both on the demos as well as the Q&A and make sure that you all get the answers that you're looking for. I basically gave you this heads up. So we're going to set some context. We're going to look at how teams are adopting AI and how that's evolved over time. I'm going to chat with these folks about their first impressions with Quill before they take over screen share and walk you through some of the things that they've been building. I have Aaron here. Aaron is from the AirOps product team, and he's going to share something that's coming very soon at AirOps to give you a sense of, what's even next after the demos that you see. And then we'll have some questions like how do you get started with some of these tools and solutions? How do you get buy-in from leadership? And then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience toward the end. With that, I'm going to hand it over to these folks. So maybe if we go left to right, starting with Tyler, do you mind sharing who you are, where you work, and what your responsibilities there include?
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Tyler Romholt. I'm from Bitly and calling in from the lovely Seattle, Washington. So responsible for our website strategy, all of our SEO, AEO work, and kind of trying to make sense of this brand new world that we're all living in. AirOps has been a really central part of us moving from kind of a L0 adoption in the world of AI up to higher levels on the kind of maturity model of AI. So very excited to be here today and share a little bit about how we're using AirOps to achieve that.
Awesome. I am Nicholas King. Hello, everybody. I work at Udemy. I am coming in from Chicago, Illinois, where we have had very tumultuous weather the last few days. But on as terms of responsibilities, I wear a lot of different hats, right? Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's content, sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's data analysis, and we have found AirOps to be helpful in all of those different buckets. So excited to talk more about some specific use cases for it. And then I will pass it to Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I work on content strategy for AI search at Chime. A lot of what are we doing both on our own surfaces like blog, and then also what are we doing offsite, especially given the fact that we know 85% of brand mentions come from third-party sources. I think a lot of what we're doing right now is finding that impossible middle ground of what we say and what others are saying, and how we can be at the forefront of directing those narratives in the way we want to go. So, really excited to show these use cases. We've been with AirOps for a little over a year, and it's really helped us scale our content production. And yeah, excited to get into it.
Love it. And Aaron, do you want to share a few words about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a solutions architect at AirOps, so I work with customers like Nick himself to build out playbooks and workflows for our customers. So yeah, excited to be here with you all.
Amazing. And I realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Jordan. I lead customer marketing at AirOps. So I get to do lots of cool things like pulling in customers of ours, like these three, to share what they've been building. I want to start before we get to in the weeds, taking a step back and looking at AI adoption. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking through what we see, but I want people in the audience to consider like, where are you on this spectrum over the last 3 years or so? Talking to a lot of teams, what we observe is, I'm going to say 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it may be, they started off in a very manual place, like empty Word docs, blank spreadsheets, adding internal links one by one, mapping everything by hand. And then when ChatGPT hit the scene, it moved to prompts like, oh my gosh, I can just ask a machine to do all of this, and trying to one-shot everything, quickly finding the limitations of that. And so you start chaining prompts like, I'm going to ask for part of the task, then I'm going to ask for the next part. Maybe I'm going to give some context here and then ask to execute. And that kind of logic of one after the other evolved into workflows. And workflows is where we've been living, especially in the world of AirOps for the last couple of years. Workflows look like designing sometimes very complex series of nodes that each have an individual point, whether that's to research or execute or brief, whatever it may be. I'd say for me at least, maybe about 6 months ago, the vibe coding really kind of took over, and suddenly every problem, the answer became like, can I make this in Claude Code? Can I spin something up that's super custom? Can I avoid getting a new tool, adding to my stack and make something myself? There are definitely pros, there are definitely cons. The last kind of new horizon that we've been seeing, that a lot of people are thinking about, and that this webinar will cover, is thinking in terms of agents, or agentic AI. And we'll get more into agents in a second, but I'm curious, in the chat, feel free to drop in, like, where are you, 1 through 6? You can do a 0.5 if you need to, but where would you plot yourself on this spectrum? A 2, a 4. Yeah, we have some nice spreads. Okay, I see a 6. That's awesome. Very cool. I see it probably hovering around 4, which is what we see. Like I said, the last couple of years from our observations have been really in this land of workflows. So I want to zoom into this transition from workflow thinking to agentic thinking. Workflows, which are quickly becoming kind of the old worlds, they're static. So it takes a lot of design up front, and then once it's designed, it lives there kind of in perpetuity until you make changes, and it requires you to go in and push a button and say like, hey, run this workflow for me. So it's a little bit reactive. It requires on a trigger to generate whatever outcome that you're looking for. Whereas agents, they're more like organic. They live and they breathe. That's why we call them agents. Like they have autonomy. They're more proactive, so they're able to develop micro strategies with you. They're always running, they're learning from their runs and adapting in real time. So, what we're finding is teams are going from spending a ton of upfront energy engineering these workflows. They're able to really quickly spin up these agents that each own hyper specific individual tasks and continually get better and kind of take on ownership of some of those really repetitive parts of the work. At AirOps, we have an agent captain called Quill. So Quill is the interface that you chat with. You can kind of think of it like, logging on to Cloud and you're just met with a big chat interface. It's the agent captain that you chat with to create all of your agents, update agents, maybe take stock of who's doing what and what you need to change to accomplish your goals. And we believe that Quill is the best way to dip your toes into agentic marketing because it has access to a ton of information about your brand and kind of the space that you're trying to win. So specifically, if you're working with AirOps, it understands the channel of AI search, all of the kind of nooks and crannies of things you need to cover to appear in LLMs. It understands your brand, all of the knowledge and the brand guidelines that you give it in order to make decisions that aren't just helpful for the channel, but really sound like your brand and elevate your brand. It understands your competition. So, what are other people doing? How do you want to stand out, both from a performance standpoint, like what's the play to get ahead of them in something like AI search, and what's your unique perspective? And then the last one is your preferences, everything from minor writing rules to, like global perspectives that you want reflected in anything that you create or refresh. I want to turn it over to the panel. We released Quill. I'm going to put myself on the spot. I don't know, like 3 weeks ago or something like that. And some of you had advanced access to start playing around with it. So, Bridget, you're first on my screen. Can we maybe go through and like, what was your first impression playing with Quill and did it change over these last few weeks?
Yeah, I think our first impression was we had already gone pretty deep into workflows with AirOps, and so we were seeing a ton of output. Like we saw a 3x citation rate. We had like really proven ROI. We had leadership buy-in. We were like, this is amazing. We're like improving content at scale and seeing those results in AI search. I think the biggest change with Quill was the ease as a user. I wasn't having to go into a workflow and have a little bit more of like an engineering mindset. Instead, it was very conversational. So we moved from like coding to clarity of like the clearer you are, the more like your output will align with what you're looking for. And it just felt like an extension of our team. Like you can easily chat with it, you can iterate on it. I would even say, like, I was updating as we went, like, please update our brand guidelines based on this feedback I just got you. And so then kind of that knowledge base, Jordan, you were just talking about, like that gets updated and built in. So each output gets better and better without having to update individual workflows. So the rules are getting written as you mess around and talk to Quill. I think that was like the huge unlock for us was the ease of use.
Super cool. Tyler, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, definitely. Same with Bridget. We were pretty heavily building in the workflows, and we were actually getting really excited about Copilot, and we were starting to use Copilot off on the side, and we're like, ah, this is pretty cool. And then this little icon appeared one day, and we're like, yeah, what is this? What is this little guy? So we were playing with it. And shout out to Will, one of the solution architects on your team, for introducing us to Quill, and it opened up so much for us. Uh, we were building these workflows, having to go in, and if we wanted to QA it or change it or whatever, we would be spending a full day building a workflow. And yes, it felt really good at the end. And yes, it did exactly what Bridget was talking about in terms of scaling our growth and content outputs and everything. But it was still taking a good amount of thinking and good amount of time to go in and do that and to kind of think through all the nuanced mechanics of it. What Quill did for us was it opened up our time to be more creative, and we could get more experimental, and we could start asking questions and proposing ideas that we were like, could we do this? Should we do this? And it allowed us to really actually just express ourselves rather than having to kind of use what we already knew to engineer something. So it really just opened up the gates to a lot more creativity in terms of like experimenting with content.
I love it. I'm going to jump in, Nicholas, if you have anything to add. But really fast, for people who are new and maybe haven't played with AirOps before, just to clarify a couple of things. Workflows, those like complex engineered series of nodes, Copilot was kind of our first foray into a conversational experience building workflows. So, you're intimidated by like the information overload, the possibilities. What is JSON? What is Liquid? How do I chain them all together into a workflow? We released Copilot, which was your kind of like conversational partner. Like, hey, can you build me a workflow that does X, Y, Z? It was a really great start. Honestly, when I joined AirOps, I was like, this Copilot thing is amazing. A couple of limitations. Number one, it didn't have like quite as much access to all of those details about your brand, about competition that I mentioned earlier. Number two, it had to do some sort of like translation of what you wanted into the workflow. And then once it was in the workflow, it wasn't always the best at like going in and surgically finding what to improve about the workflow. There was always this like you're speaking two different languages from what exists on the page and what you're trying to control via Copilot. And it also only works within one workflow. So Quill is just this like, it's a coworker. It understands everything about your brand and it's able to dip into all of your different playbooks, all of your brand kits, knowledge bases to create this kind of like really performant universe of refreshing, creating content. Yeah. Just want to make sure it's a bit clear and you'll actually like see all of these things we're talking about in just a moment. Nicholas, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Honestly, just echoing the sentiments of Bridget and Tyler, just in terms of ease of use, except we at Udemy were coming at it from the standpoint of not being heavily integrated with workflows. Like we hadn't been using them for that long when we onboarded AirOps before we got access to Quill. So just coming at it from just like the learning curve perspective, playbooks are much more intuitive in terms of how to use them, how to get better at using them. Workflows were really rewarding. Totally, 100% agree with that. But there was a fairly steep learning curve at first just because it was so new. But again, playbooks feel much more familiar with just like general prompting and skills that we've all been building over the last few years.
Totally. Totally. Okay, right on. One more thing I want to share. If you're interested in learning more about Quill, we're going to do these demos. I'll show the screen afterwards, so now is not your only chance, but want to let people know that they can, and this is actually, I'm just going to make sure I'm showing the right thing. Apologies. There's an old version. This is the new version. So if you scan this QR code or send an email to growth@airops.com with the subject line or with the word webinar in the subject line, we will hook you up. We can give you like a personalized one-on-one walkthrough of Quill and all the cool things you can build, such as these demos that we're going to transition to. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, actually, first, Tyler, maybe do you want to give us some intro, and then when we're ready to dip into the product, you can take over screen share?
Yeah, for sure. Really for us, at Bitly, we really are a huge team built around experimentation. In-app, on the website, in our emails that we send out, everything is based around experimentation. So what we really wanted to do was to accelerate the rate at which we can experiment, because the faster we can get experiments out, the faster we can get ideas out, the faster we can learn. I think the old adage for, especially around CRO, is like only 10 to 15% of your experiments actually result in a lift or a successful test. So if you're only running, one or two experiments a month, you're only going to get one really successful outcome in, half a year to a year. And that's just is such that's such a yesterday kind of way of thinking. And so our big goal for using AirOps and why we took on AirOps was so that we could increase the amount of time or increase the amount of experiments we could run and turn it into a daily habit and not a quarterly project. So really the distance between having an idea and it's live and we can measure it was like in terms of like weeks. We weren't able to like go from idea to learning until like 3 or 4 weeks between testing and learning things. So what I'm going to share today is how we use AirOps to, and especially how we've been using Quill and the playbooks to accelerate our experimentation. So let me go ahead and get my window shared here. All right. I think you can all see that. Thumbs up. Yes.
Looks
Cool.
great.
Awesome. Very cool. So, one big way that you can experiment, especially around search and nowadays AEO, is the traditional idea of like programmatic pages. They're really helpful for getting highly detailed, highly personalized, traditionally from a long tail search perspective. But nowadays, programmatic is really focused around getting, helping LLMs gain context and getting awareness of what you can offer, what you can do, and all the different ways that you can interface with a company. And so we wanted to create it both from an SEO perspective, but also from a longer tail kind of search and agentic perspective. So traditionally, it would take weeks of engineering, research, building, and all this stuff. And what we were able to do with Quill was simply have a conversation with it and give it our goals and give it our outcomes that we wanted. And so this is about 95% built with Quill and about 5% of refinement going in, making a couple edits. But essentially, what this this is just one example of programmatic. And this is taking all of our first party integrations, as well as all the places we don't natively integrate with, and talking about how we can integrate. And so it goes through and it actually is a full on research agent as well as a generative agent where it goes and builds the content. And as well, on top of that, it also directly integrates into our WordPress instance on the back end. So we have a headless CMS that we use with WordPress, and it programmatically builds go ahead and builds these pages here. So pretty exciting stuff. So what we're able to do is go through this whole thing. It runs through, we give it content to look at. So we just put in a URL essentially. We give it the primary, oh, actually here, let me scroll over here. Yep. Okay, cool. So what we do is we have our integration. We just give it a name. We literally just give it a name. We say, hey, what do we want to integrate with? And we give it the brand name. It goes through, pulls our brand kit. It understands if we have a native or a third-party integration because it goes out to our marketing marketplace and looks to see if we have a native integration for it. And if we do, great. If not, it'll say third-party. It goes through and generates the integration page. It then does a full formatting, and it actually outputs it into raw HTML that we're then able to upload directly. And it actually does this natively with the WordPress integration. It pushes it into WordPress in a staging environment, does an SEO pass. So we have an SEO agent. And so we're able to then bring in all these onto the staging environment. So what we're actually able to do here is build these at scale. And so we originally came up with, I think, about 50 or so pages and 50 integrations. So Josh, your question about how many pages we've created. So this is just one part of it. And this is kind of the result here, where you actually, all of these, you would think, okay, well, this might take a couple weeks to build. You've got to do all your research. You've got to go in and do all these native kind of this content on each individual page. All of these pages were built and published in, I want to say, like 4 hours of just doing a little bit of QA and refinement on the back end. The biggest amount of time for us was actually working with our web developer to get the connections right. But once we got that connection right, we hit go. And we now had 50 pages that were published in an afternoon, all unique, all optimized for different search and already ready to be indexed and have the ability for the chatbots to go in and learn more about our integrations and to take action on that. So that's one experiment. So, from idea to publishing took us about a week for this. And, from a week instead of months to building a programmatic. We're already doing our competitor one next, and we actually have a use case programmatic that we're building out where we're actually going to be scaling up to hundreds of different highly, highly unique use case pages. So for every individual type of use case, you might want to create a short link or QR code for. So that's one of them. The next one is really kind of a fun one. And this is really where it's like, if you have an idea and you want to test it out, Quill with AirOps lets you do that. And so I was looking around on a financial blog and I noticed this little button and it said essentially like explore more with ChatGPT. And so I was like, that's interesting. And so it's a financial blog and it was like telling you to go and have this kind of conversation with AI to further the learning that you have. So I was like, what if we did that for our business, but we're able to look at all the different contextual pages that we have on our website, whether it's a blog post, a article, or a product page, or even a developer documentation, and be able to continue that conversation and ask further questions off of our site into ChatGPT. So again, I had a conversation with Quill and gave it my idea. And so what it does is it optimizes an LLM prompt, it creates a CTA button, and it pre-fills the prompt for the LLM. So ChatGPT has this feature where if you feed it like a query parameter, you can pre-populate a chat with something. And so just so that I don't take up too much more time, it's just a pretty straightforward prompt. It does research for you. It goes in, and I had it generate for both Bitly and QRCG. So it looks at a page, it analyzes, figures out what type of page it is. It identifies the target audience. It comes up with a prompt, what the CTA button is, and then gives us that deep link that then we can put on the site. Kind of our next version of this is we're going to integrate it just like we did with programmatic with our WordPress integration so that it automatically goes and updates the pages. And what you get is something like this, where we would have these key takeaways, but it would add a CTA here to where it's actually like a prompt to say, hey, go and set up your QR menu in ChatGPT. And so what happens is you click that link, it brings you over and it prompts you with the thing that AirOps generated. And so it references the URL, it says, hey, how should I handle updates? It has that conversation. And what this is actually doing is you are not just having that kind of further connection to our brand over on the LLMs, and you're furthering your own understanding and furthering your business objectives. You're actually also telling the LLM that I think that this brand is important because I'm referencing them. And so what you're actually doing is not only kind of benefiting yourself and saying like, oh, hey, I really want to understand how to build better QR menus. I actually want it to be based off of this blog post or this solution page that I read. And this trains the LLMs, not only from a personal, like your memory standpoint, but also the generalized training. If you have that enabled, you're able to then train the LLMs to say, hey, QR code generator, Bitly, so on and so forth, is an important source. Because when you hit that button and you actually get the response, it's actually sourcing our website. And so it's actually logging that and it's sending those, signals not only to your own personalized version of AI, but also to the general training sets that QR code generator is a reliable source for doing this type of research. And we were only able to do this at scale with Quill. It would have taken weeks for us to do to kind of come up with different combinations, and all this. So like this again, this was like I had an idea, I put it into Quill, it gave me the results. We started publishing the same afternoon. So we're able to go from idea to live to learning in just a few days.
So cool. I think like both examples are so powerful. The second example especially shows the like, I don't know, kind of fun or creativity that you're able to reclaim when you're not trying to be like, okay, how do I fit this into the quarter and how do I like resource this and what am I deprioritizing to put this on the roadmap and all of that. So
Oh yeah, we're getting rid of roadmaps. Like that's the thing. We're done with roadmaps. We're all now just about rapid iteration and experimentation.
super cool. Very cool. Well, somebody already asked for the template, so I think you're inspiring the people. Sweet. Okay, Nicholas, I'm going to pass it on over to you. Before sharing your screen, do you want to give a little bit of context about what you were trying to solve and build?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we're trying to tackle on the Udemy side, and I think a challenge that a lot of people are trying to figure out in the SEO world is how do you leverage AI to create content that is unique and helpful, right? AI is great at producing content at scale, but it's not always content that stands out or resonates, and in some cases, it's just not even all that helpful. And as a learning company, people come to Udemy to, impact their career trajectory, to impact their livelihood. And if we over-index on producing commodity content or content that's easily replicated or produced by AI, then we're going to fail not only from a performance standpoint, but more importantly, we're going to fail to provide our users with the information they need to make potentially meaningful changes. So the goal for AirOps was, of course, to create efficiencies in our content production process, but it was also to inform us on what are the most impactful ways we can provide guidance and information to our users. But how do you do that, right? There are some challenges that we're facing. One is identifying intent, right? That's something I think we can all relate to on some level. We did an analysis of our 30,000 most searched keywords that we ranked on the first page for and found that 73% of that search volume was attributable to keywords with ambiguous intent, meaning it is unclear based on the query itself whether somebody's looking for information or a product. And even if they're looking for information, right, what information are they looking for? The intent doesn't always map to what the query might imply. So, really wanting to use AirOps to get a better understanding of user intent. We also went through significant lapses on our consumer blog where, I mean, I'm talking about years where we weren't publishing any content. And as a result, our blog's subdomains authority stagnated and potentially declined. So we have a really hard time competing in highly competitive spaces. So it makes the need for unique authoritative points of view even more important, but also we need to be more diligent about identifying topics that are relevant to us as a brand. And the last challenge I'll point out before we dive into the playbook is subject matter expertise, right? Udemy has a marketplace of thousands of topics, which are largely niche or super technical in nature. And not only that, but Udemy itself isn't actually creating the learning content. We have a lot of insight into learning and skill trends, but in terms of like the granularity of any given topic, we don't actually have a lot of SMEs to tap into. So subject matter expertise is a challenge. So I will now we can dive into playbook. I'll share my screen. All right, we good? Everybody can see this? Cool. So on the surface, this is going to be very straightforward, right? These are steps that you could probably easily replicate in Claude or whichever tool of your choosing. You're going to do some competitive analysis, you're going to do some keyword research, and you're going to produce some content, right? But I think the playbook format is what allows us to create guidelines and instructions that really impact the end output. So first, right, we have our information gathering phase. We're looking at what's performing well in traditional search. If an AIO is present, what information is included, what kind of content is getting cited for our relevant prompts, right? All well and good. Stuff that you could probably identify with using other tools. But then we try and unpack the why of it all. And it's the why part where I think playbooks deliver a lot of value and the parts that improved upon from workflows, right? Why something ranks well is generally due to a mix of both explicit and ambiguous factors. Explicit factors are things like structure, keywords, length, things that are easily quantifiable. And it's here you could probably get away with using other tools, but it's the more ambiguous factors, things like, again, user intent. What are the pain points? What's the background of the people that are actually consuming this content? It's factors like this where you want more agentic reasoning involved because you're going to get clearer, more accurate outputs. So we use this playbook to identify both the explicit and ambiguous factors, but we also try to look at things like what are gaps in coverage that exists? Are there any duplicative content concerns within our own catalog? But also, like, why is this topic relevant to Udemy as a brand? Why do we think that we can reasonably compete here, right? So once we have all of that analysis, of course, we feed it into our tool, which then creates our outputs, right? Our outlines, our drafts. And I'm going to skip through this because a lot of this is fairly straightforward. A lot of our instruction is based on making sure the content is formatted in a way that's digestible for both users and search engines, making sure we're staying true to our brand guidelines. But one piece that I do want to dive in a little bit deeper into is this instructor commentary section here. So this gets back to our question of how do we include subject matter expertise into our content? So Udemy has an amazing instructor community comprised of real world subject matter experts, right? The skills you want to learn, the companies you want to work for, these are people who have gone out and actually accomplished these things and can help you get to where you want to go. So we rely heavily on them to, again, inject authority and like unique points of view on topics that are niche or highly technical. So we created what we call the instructor commentary program, which is basically we created a list of instructors who have registered to participate, and we created a repository of all of the commentary that they've given to us. So one thing that we have AirOps do is when we're producing content is go check that repository of commentary for what is most relevant, right? Based on the information gathering phase we did in the initial part, we understand what are the most important pressing questions that users have. And so AirOps is able to, in the snap of a finger, go into our repository and identify whether we have commentary that addresses those questions or not. And if not, then it'll go identify the instructors in that list, that registration list, that would be good candidates to partner with on answering these questions. And also will surface again those questions that we should be having instructors answer. So again, just in terms of like ease of use and efficiency, it's super helpful. All right, moving on. The next thing I'll talk about is linking, right? This is more like anecdotal, but one thing that I've struggled with both as a creator and as a consumer is when it comes to like cited sources and data points that get surfaced in content. A lot of the time, the source that's being cited is like a blog that's referencing a study that was done elsewhere. It's not even the original source. A lot of the time, it's outdated, and a lot of the time, it's not even entirely relevant. So the playbook allows us to create more guidelines around the types of data and sources that we're surfacing in our content. Like we're sticking to highly reputable, fresh data, and also making sure that we're not directly citing our competitors, of course, right? You're borrowing from the authority of the sources that you're citing. So we want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward there. The last thing that I'll talk about before we look at what some of the outputs are is this media analyzer. So one thing that is becoming more and more apparent is the need for multimedia assets in your content, right? Especially for highly competitive topics. But Udemy has a lot of constraints when it comes to being able to actually produce assets. We can't, like in terms of quantity and just the types of assets that we're able to produce. So we need to effectively identify which topics we should prioritize creating assets for, but also which types of assets are going to be most helpful for any given topic. So we have a media analyzer that again goes through and analyzes what are the top performing pages, what are the types of assets that they're including in their content, and what part of the user intent is this asset addressing, right? What information are you including? So I'll go now to our outputs first. We'll look at some of the artifacts. So let's go with this AI certified AI practitioner or AWS AI certified practitioner article. We'll look at the competitive analysis, which again goes beyond just competitive analysis. It's identifying the intent, who's searching for this, what are they looking for, what are the pain points, what are the most common questions that they're asking, what is being covered currently by the top performing articles, what's not being covered, what is the general structure and formatting of all of this content. But again, some of the pieces that I find the most helpful, and again, which is due to a lot of like the brand kit and inputs that we're able to put, is why is this topic relevant to Udemy as a brand? And why do we think we'd be able to effectively compete for this topic, right? It's like if you're just going off of demand, there are certain topics seem more appealing than others, but you're not going to be able to reasonably compete for those topics. So again, getting that extra layer of insight is extremely helpful. And then also, so talking about the media analyzer too, I'll jump to this table right here. I think this table is extremely helpful, right? We're able to see out of the top three performing articles for this topic, two had images, one had a table. None of them included video or infographics, charts, whatever, right? So there's different insights you can take from this. One is, okay, this might not be a super high priority topic to produce assets around, but another way of looking at it is, oh man, if we do include video or infographics, that's a potential differentiator for us to perform well. Because again, the whole point is to be as unique as possible. So what's a bonus? Like we know explicitly a way to be unique is to include video or infographics. So this media analyzer is extremely helpful in terms of that process, but it'll also give you recommendations on what assets to actually create. So that piece is helpful as well. Looking at the actual article, I'll go through this pretty quickly because I think in terms of the formatting, it's going to be pretty straightforward, right? You have your key takeaways. We have our instructor quotes, right, which is great. Our commentary for our instructors. The content is formatted in a way that's succinct, using lists when appropriate. And then I'll scroll down to our sources, right? We're citing relatively reputable sources and fresh data. So where I would say we're earlier on in our process than I think Tyler and Bridget are, so we're still exploring, we're still waiting to see results. But just in terms of getting to this point, AirOps has been extremely helpful. Again, more efficiently and just building confidence in the kind of content that we're producing, right? When we've used AI in the past, even with things that we've published, there hasn't always been a level of confidence that we're being as helpful as we possibly could be. So being able to feed in internal data and the instructor commentary just helps alleviate some of those trust issues. And the last thing I'll say before I'll end is I just want to give a shout out to Aaron, who's on the call, who's one of our solutions architects. It's always great working with Aaron. He asks a lot of really smart questions. I really feel like he understands where we're trying to get to. So just like the tool is helpful, but also just the people at AirOps I've had a great pleasure working with. So
I love it. Super cool. I was in content editorial for a long time, and so many of the issues that you described were things that would take such a long time, like going down rabbit holes of like, okay, I like this stat, but it links to a blog that links to a blog that links to a blog that links back to the first blog. Was this just made up? And that's something that you could spend so long doing and never get a helpful answer for. So yeah, super cool solutions. I want to pass the mic over now to Bridget to share some of the things that she's been building over at Chime.
I feel like I'm also in this webinar as a viewer, like I'm just taking screenshots of all your guys' cool stuff. So it's awesome being on this webinar, and it's also just so cool to see all of the different use cases with Quill. And my brain is going a million miles a minute of what else we can do. Yeah, so just to set the scene a little bit for the example I'm going to share, I am on the AI search like function of organic growth. So all of our KPIs and like what we present to leadership is very focused on AI search. So what that means is like we're based on our visibility score. So we put a ton of prompts into AirOps. That score comes out, and that is like a measurement for us. So on a weekly basis, we have these pacing meetings. How are we doing in LLMs? Where are we showing up? What topics are we winning in? What topics are we losing in? What is our competition doing in the space? It was incredibly manual. Like we're pulling, it feels like almost there's no end. It's like as soon as pacing meeting ends, you're starting for the next week to see what you can do and how you can keep up. And we are having difficulty at times keeping up with the speed of search because so much is changing and a new ChatGPT version is coming out. And is that citing Reddit or is that citing YouTube? And how do we keep up? And what are our competitors doing? And I think the other like limitation we had was when we would find areas that we would be dropping. So I'm going to just give an example. Like one thing we want to win on is like the topic of direct deposit, right? Chime is very focused on getting direct deposits. A lot of your benefits and rewards are unlocked with direct deposit. How are we showing up when people are asking ChatGPT, like, what is the best bank for direct deposit? And so if we saw that that topic was falling at times, it would be me and a ton of my colleagues like going really deep, trying to find out what articles we could refresh, what articles we needed to create. A lot of times we were kind of flying blind of like, if direct deposit's going down, I mean, we have this one article, so I guess we can refresh it and like see if that helps. But we weren't as like tactical and straightforward as we wanted of like surfacing those insights. I think it's also important, like something we realized was like it's not a one size fit all. And if we're talking about credit cards, our competition might be completely different than when we're talking about debit cards, and we want to win in credit and debit. So, what's going on in the space of credit cards compared to debit cards? Are landing pages performing better? Is it blogs? There's just so much moving around in this space. And so I think the use case that we built out, which I'll share, is kind of like helping us surface and bring very niche insights to light, and taking into account that it's not a one size fit all, but knowing our whole brand, which Jordan also talked about in one of the first slides, is like having all of that brand knowledge in our site map. It's no longer really a guessing game with AirOps. It's like, hey, we've seen exactly where your declines are. We know what pages are getting cited, not only percentage wise, but number wise. Like we can show you how many times this page has been cited in ChatGPT in the last week compared to the week before, compared to month over month, and then we can even pull like year over year. So it has like a ton of historical data on Chime, and then we're able to kind of take action on it and then measure all within the same system. But it's really helped this like insight to action, just like with a click of a button. So yeah, let me share what that looks like in practice. Okay, so here is what we call the content refresh scout. And this runs on, I've set it up. So speaking of like the agentic side of things, I've set it up to run every Monday morning at 9 a.m. So when I'm starting my week, it's like, where did we fall? What are we winning in and losing in? And kind of how can we get back on track? And so I think a helpful like example to show is what this actually looks like. Is here's like your opportunity gap prioritization. I kind of just talked to you guys about like the topics, but I asked it to build out in topics how many AI answers, what is our mention and citation rate looking like, and then what is the implication. So I think this is like where it really is proving the not one size fits all. Like, hey, we have this product that launched, but for some reason our content isn't breaking through. So when we're talking about rewards specifically, like let's get stronger about Chime Prime versus like Chime's core product, but we're underperforming. So like what narrative are we not telling strong enough in debit card that we can improve? And I think in the past we might have applied more of a one size fit all of like, let's just update all of our articles and like put Chime Prime in there. But that might not have been the right like product to be putting on a debit card page. So I just love how in depth it goes, how much it knows our brand. And then it starts pulling by topic opportunity size, meaningful declines, which is what we care about here, right? Is like what's losing that we need to bring back up to stat sig, and then what is our like keyword volume there. So again, it's like SEO is still the foundation. Like what's the search volume? We don't want to be like spending all of our effort refreshing a page that's not getting a ton of search anyways. And so here it would kind of tell you why this page, which was something I kind of built out and queued in this playbook, was tell me why and like what's going on. Don't just tell me that it's dropping. Then it will give me the decline signals and then the prioritization rationale. So again, this is just tying back up to these like top three things. Then, so after this runs automatically and it does all of this, it will appear in a grid for me. And this grid is like approved content refresh ideas. So you'll see here, I basically had it pull in these articles that it deemed were like priority. It ran it, it did the refresh, and then it put it into a Google Doc. I think this is one thing I know Tyler's like all the way through, which is our dream state. We are in a highly regulated industry, so all of our things have to go to compliance. So actually just getting it into a Google Doc, I've set up an integration on our end with Jira that pulls these Google Docs into Jira, creates a ticket for then compliance. And then one thing I wanted to point out, and this is why I like love Quill so much, is like here I can give feedback on this grid and add whatever. And I just noticed like, okay, we were going from here, it was pulling it into a grid, it was refreshing, but this grid doesn't know everything I just read in the playbook. So how do I bring in the refresh rationale? Like, let's give this, I always like think of it like an intern, like let's give this intern as much like context as possible. And like, here's this one intern that knows everything that's pulling it to another intern, but does this intern know everything that like all the context. I think that's like the main thing here is that I really want to like lean in on is like context is everything. And with playbooks and Quill, you can give so much context. And so now this agent is pulling from like, why are we refreshing this? What's going on? Like, give me a little bit of the data. Then I'm going to pull in here your content refresh that we use all the time with your brand guidelines, with the competitive analysis. And we've seen like such improvement of just like this one step being added. Like, for example, I think this payday advance apps, it was like one of our hypothesis of why we were falling was 2026 wasn't mentioned throughout. So even though it was published in 2026, our headings weren't saying like payday advance apps in 2026. And just putting that in this rationale, we got a ton of H2s with 2026 on the output. So here's an example of like an article that went through that. And then you come in and it's like way more specific of like what are people searching. It's pulling that in. I think a lot of feedback we got was like the number, like ChatGPT was misciting how many fee-free ATMs we had that Quill surfaced. And so then all throughout this article we say it many times to like reinforce that. I'm so excited about this because it's like the pacing aspect to the action, and then we're able to come back and measure it. I think like one thing we're talking about right now, even with the team, I liked how Tyler showed like here's where we're going with like the ChatGPT CTA example, where we want to go eventually too is bringing in a little bit of like geo targeting with AirOps of like now that we have ATMs, like how do we get even more niche? I think we're also seeing that in the AI landscape. Like how do you create content that's very specific that no other competitor or platform has? And for Chime, it's like we know the Chime deals, we know where to direct you. And so how do we integrate this into blog more natively? That's like our next step that I want to go with this content refresh is like, how do we get an engineer integration a little more of like, let's pull some live data and put it out here out of our app and into AI search. And then I think like the main thing is just like eventually wanting to be able to trace back to these URLs, like the specific measurement that these drove instead of just the topic. And I think that will be like the most full circle of like, here's what this like refresh scout has unlocked. So yeah.
Super, super cool. I love the perspective you bring as like a search strategist, thinking about like how does all this action actually help us show up in AI search, and how do we keep track of it because it's such a moving target, it's so new. Cool. I'm keeping an eye on time. We have Aaron here to give us a little preview of something called campaigns, and then we have a couple questions in the Q&A, which are really great. So we'll jump into those and hopefully wrap right around time. Aaron, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sounds good. So I think a key question and something that Bridget brought up is how do we tighten the feedback loop between our AEO data and also our content strategy? And so at AirOps, we recently launched a feature called campaigns to do exactly that. I'm going to share my screen and show you a quick walkthrough. Let me know if you can see this. Okay, perfect. So here we're on our on-site tab. You can see all your pages by their folder, including their citation rate and their mention rate. So what we can do is actually ask Quill to analyze this data. And let me show you this quick chat history I have. So I told Quill to analyze all the blog pages with declining citation and mention rate over the last month. And then it mentioned that some categories that are hardest hit, for example, are graphic design software or web design software. I followed up with a quick question on, which competitor is actually overtaking our citation rate. And it analyzed all the competitors and mentioned that Wix is the main competitor to Webflow, which is our example here, that's overtaking our citation rate. So I asked Quill to generate what's called a refresh campaign to close the citation gap with Wix. Let me walk you through what a campaign actually looks like. Here's a campaign. This is something that Quill generated by itself. It comes in 3 stages. The first is opportunities. Opportunities are automatically surfaced for pages that fit our criteria. So in this case, it's blog pages related to web design, And particularly, they're declining in citations, and also Wix is overtaking that page in citations. Next, it's connected to the action layer. So, of all the opportunities that Quill gave us, we can send it to this action layer and actually plug it into this content refresh playbook. And so, in this content refresh playbook, we're generating a new article based on competitive analysis and inserting brand angles to counteract those claims. Finally, to close the loop, we have measurement. So for each page that we publish, we can track citation rate, mention rate over time, and that is a campaign in a nutshell. We can analyze data, take action, and then measure our impact.
Amazing. Thank you, Aaron. I want to shout out, I know we've covered so many different examples, and especially if you haven't played around, some of this might be like quite dense, I suppose. So I want to flash this up one more time. If you want like a deeper conversation with the AirOps team to learn more about campaigns, playbooks, any of these use cases, whether that's programmatic, AI search, send an email to growth@airops.com and we'll get you connected with somebody who can give you a walkthrough. You can also scan this QR code. We have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask the experts a couple of questions that came through the chat. So let me see if I can do the Q&A, answer live. I hope you can see this. If not, I'll read it out to you. Somebody, they're anonymous. They want a little bit of insight into team structure. So when you spin up new initiatives like this, is it one person that's owning it? Do you fully dedicate functions? Does everybody have access to these kinds of tools? How maybe does that change if you're like quite a robust team or like a small, scrappy team getting started? Yeah, go for it, Tyler.
Yeah, so we have kind of a pool of people that we've trained up, everything from developers to content folk and brand people in the brand team to kind of do different pieces of it. So, like, we've got our product marketing function goes in and kind of manages and maintains our brand kit and our knowledge bases. We've got our developer that goes in and makes sure that when we're connecting into WordPress, that like the widgets kind of work together and everything. But we do have a dedicated SEO and content growth manager that is essentially our official content engineer on the team. And so we do have one person who is the kind of architect of all of these pieces. Now, granted, that meant previously we had to have a bunch of people in workflow, or he had to go into workflows and do all this stuff. But with, again, Quill, it's really democratizing the ability to go in and build things. So we are ramping up people now to be a lot more self-serve. And so while his role is very focused and most of his day is in AirOps now. If people do want to come in and work on it, it just makes it so much easier.
Cool. Bridget, Nicholas, anything specific you'd like to add, or should I move on to the next one?
I again would just echo what Tyler said. It really depends on which piece you're trying to accomplish, right? Where like similarly, we had someone from our product marketing team help with the like establishing our brand kit and making sure our brand guidelines were right. When setting up the integration with WordPress, right? That involved engineers. But in terms of the actual like content production itself, that's largely one person. Shout out to Myra, our one person content powerhouse. So she handles most of the content responsibilities on her own, right? Which is insane given the like content velocity and production all being handled by one person. But again, just speaks to how helpful AirOps can be.
That's awesome. With just 1 minute left, maybe if you give a speed answer to a couple of these questions. Somebody wanted to know, like, is what you showed today, were those built out by the AirOps team for like the purpose of this call or for you, or was it developed by the experts? How confident do you feel in the tool versus leaning on our team?
I would say we think of AirOps at Chime as an extension of our team. So a lot of times it's either co-building or I build something out and then I'm pinging our solutions architect Anton and being like, Anton, help me make this stronger. Like I think I pulled him in this case, built out iterated a ton, just me and Quill. And then I pulled him in to help me add that column that was giving a little bit more insight that I talked about of like why we're doing the refresh. I would say a lot of it with Quill is our teams doing it, and AirOps is there to support, honestly. I think we've learned a ton, but it's not like workflows where we were really handing off to AirOps. And then when I had an issue, it would take Anton an hour to solve it. Now it's like when I'm asking him for something, it's a 5 minute ask where it might be more native to him. And a lot of times I'm hopping on calls of like, hey, can you just show me how to do this so I don't have to bug you about it? And then our weekly meetings with AirOps is like, here's this new product that came out, or like, Bridget, I was thinking about geo-targeting and like I think there's an opportunity for Chime. So it's like really strategic partnership. It's not as much like manual building. And I think that's like our biggest unlock with AirOps is like I joke that you guys read our minds because every week we get on a call and there's like a new product that's launching. And I'm like, we were talking about this yesterday internally. So I think that's a little bit of like behind the scenes of how these work for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a bit meta, but when we were prepping for this webinar, you were basically describing, I want some way to like get a feedback loop where I can understand and measure how my playbook is performing. And I was like, cool, Aaron's going to show you
You're like,
what that
just
looks like.
wait, we're launching a product. I'm like, of course you
Yeah.
are.
Right on. Well, thank you all. A couple of things to know. This was recorded. We're going to publish a recap and make sure that all these great insights don't, disappear in a cloud of smoke once I hit end webinar. But Bridget, Tyler, Nicholas, Aaron, thank you all so much for coming. I have, if anybody wants to find you on LinkedIn, you can find these folks here. And like I said, shoot us a note at growth@airops.com if you want a more one-on-one walkthrough through these use cases or have any follow-up questions. I know it was a dense webinar full of lots of learning, so happy to dive deeper into anything you saw today. Cool. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
day. Bye.